History of Yoga Part 2, Vivekananda and European Intellectuals. We've discussed the influence of Helena Blavatsky and Theosophists, what happened in Europe, and now let's take a look at the other side of the coin, Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda was Hindu, his teacher was Sri Ramakrishna, who is depicted here. And what was happening at that period? In India there started some kind of national liberation movement. English were ingenious in some things, but even geniuses make mistakes. So what did English do till that period? They had made a stake on the national Hindu elite. So they said, we will create national elite through which we will govern. And it's natural. 100,000 Englishmen cannot rule the 100 million Hindus. As later Indira Gandhi had said, India is an ocean which cannot be ruled. So English decided to create a hierarchy of governing, and they nurtured Hindu elite. So they created universities such as BHU, Banaras Hindu University, and Sampurnanda, the Sanskrit University of Varanasi. At the entrance of Sampurnanda there is a stela which is covered by the Freemasonic symbols. Actually, several Masonic clans had gathered to create this very university. The idea was to help Hindus recreate their spirituality. So English had decided to give to the intellectual elite of India any kind of intellectual aid and not to give them any rule of military power. We will leave the army for ourselves, said the English, and this was their mistake. Hindus liberated themselves without the army. They liberated themselves based on intellectual understanding. In fact, during the 19th century, Hindu intellectuals had gathered such a powerful intellectual potential that it was possible to export it to the West. So what actually Swami Vivekananda did? He became an enlightener of the West, and in 1893 there was the World Congress of Religions, and it preceded all the World Congresses of Religions and UNCSD. And who do you think had organized the World Congress of Religions? The Theosophical Society, and young Swami Vivekananda came to that Congress. Vivekananda had practiced yoga under the guidance of Sri Ramakrishna, which can be learned through reading Romain Rolland's stories. This great French writer has the marvelous book Life of Vivekananda and Life of Ramakrishna. As it is easy to guess, he should have practiced yoga as well. So Vivekananda had come to the World Congress of Religions to tell about Hindu spirituality, but he couldn't be accepted at the Congress of Religions because he didn't represent any kind of religion, but he was Mason, as most Hindu elite, and brothers had helped him to do the speech. He was an incredibly charismatic speaker. So after his speech he received several minutes of standing ovation, and then started the great journey of Vivekananda from England to Japan, including Americas, where he was spreading ideas of Hindu spirituality. Based on his lectures, several books were published and named Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and Raja Yoga. In fact, he started popularizing yoga for the West. That is, thanks to whom it had happened. It's hard to tell how had Vivekananda personally treated Hatha Yoga. There is a quote of Vivekananda which says, "How would you control your mind if your body is not strong enough?" So probably he had practiced Hatha Yoga personally. At least in modern Vivekananda ashrams, Hatha Yoga is practiced as of today. However, the level of Hatha Yoga practice is not high enough according to modern standards. To get the idea of how huge Vivekananda's role is on popularizing India to the West, one might just take a look at the picture. The top right picture is from Kanyakumari, which is the marginal southern point of India, and more to the south is only this small island, and on this island there stands the colossal statue of Vivekananda. This is the place where he is considered to get his first enlightenment, Samadhi. He had got to that island, meditated there for several days, and received his first mystical experience. But if we take a look at the Western India, for instance, India's gate in Mumbai, these are the gates through which the English had left India, and there is one more statue of Vivekananda which looks through these gates, as if he says goodbye to them, and there is the same statue on the east. So Vivekananda had strengthened the Indian self-identity and the Indian spiritual identity to the extent that it was impossible to consider Hindus a mere monkeys wearing dhoti. So the popularity of India and the popularity of yoga had risen. He also made the second great translation of Yoga Sutra. Maybe there were some intermediate ones, surely under the auspices of Theosophical Society. And as of today, I consider this translation to be one of the greatest and the deepest from Sanskrit to English. Vivekananda's teacher, Ramakrishna, was a very unusual person. He was a very unusual Brahman. For example, he decided once to test what is the difference between all the world religions. So for a year he rejected Hinduism and accepted Muslim faith. Then he rejected Islam and adopted Christianity, and so on, and had derived on some conclusions. Even these times it's hard to imagine, but at that times it was unthinkable, and he derived on the conclusion that all the religions have something in common, so it is not necessary to quarrel. The truth is higher than all the religious beliefs, so the external form doesn't really matter. And that was not the hardest experiment which he made with himself. He was a truly great mystic. Ramakrishna had written not much because he was rather a man of ecstatic type, but Vivekananda, interpreting Ramakrishna's thoughts, began playing with different religious traditions. For example, as you remember, in Christianity there are 4 evangelists, corresponding to bull, lion, man and eagle. And playing with this metaphor, he stated that there are 4 ways of cognition, which he correlated with 4 ways of yoga. The eagle's way, when you fly over the whole world and see the interconnections from the meta-context. The lion's way, where you tear the experiences apart and thus gain knowledge. The cunning way of a man who searches experiences and so on. And the bull's way, where you slowly work and get to the truth step by step. Vivekananda himself surely was the lion. That's why I called that slide the lion's roar. He was a very passionate and desperate man. And he also experimented with himself in different ways. Walk across the whole India in sadhu outfit, or to swim long distance in the ocean, to meditate on the lonely island, and so on. So this is the truly outstanding personality who infected Europe with yoga. And the next remarkable figure is Sir John Woodroffe, also known as Arthur Avalon. He was of high birth and worked in Calcutta's Court of Laws, and he was the first European to enter the true tantric tradition, the Kaula tradition. And in that tradition he managed to reach to the texts which were very secretly kept by the Hindus. All his life he spent traveling Bengal, receiving initiations and gathering ancient texts. And he translated those texts. Thanks to this man, we know what is chakral system, because the first text translated into English about chakral system, the Shat Chakra Nirupana, the text of about 16th century, which describes chakras as we know them now, was translated in English by John Woodroffe, and he published 2 very important books, which are The Serpent's Power, which is the detailed description of Shat Chakra Nirupana, and the second amazing book, The Garland of Letters. The alphabet in Sanskrit is called Akshara Mala. Akshara means the letter and Mala means the garland. This book links chakra petals with Sanskrit letters. All the Sanskrit phonosemantics is within this book. Later he issued lots of deep translations where he first familiarized Europe with tantric tradition. And he was actually to break the tradition, considering tantra to be something marginal and dirty, which was actually very natural for the English Victorian times. In fact, he had shown that Tantra is very deep, very complex and a very intellectual tradition, for which we have to thank to him. We must say that yoga has always greatly influenced European intellectuals. Of course, we come across Stefan Zweig. He has an absolutely terrific book called The Eyes of the Eternal Brother. In fact, these are his experiences of Bhagavad Gita, the influence of deeds, and the possibility of non-doing. In fact, he revises Bhagavad Gita's scenario and comes to similar conclusions. But I assume that Stefan Zweig was familiar with Eastern mysticism through the Anthroposophical Society, and of course Hermann Hesse, but here everything is clear enough. And this is the place to finish the second part of our story.